Luxury might not be the first thing you think of when you think about the Soviet Union. As stereotypical, these cars produced in the Soviet Union were bad, cheap and underpowered mass-produced cars. However, not always. Prior to the 1950s, there were very few private cars in the Soviet Union, and those were given by the government to special members of the society, like scientists, singers, some workers made publicly known for their achievements, and extensively used in the propaganda. When in the 1960s Soviet Union started production of cars intended to be sold to private citizens for money, not only given as a reward, the interest of the society was overwhelming despite the very high prices of the cars in comparison to levels of income and lack of any credits for car purchase. These cars were as simple as can be and basically weren't luxurious. Cars that however couldn't be bought were luxury vehicles the leaders would be driven around in. But where did the Soviet Union's luxury car start? As far as I could find, it would be all the way back to 1936, when the Soviet Union was just 14 years old. To simply understand how expensive cars were in the Soviet Union, I compared car prices and wages between 1950s up until the 1980s. The average monthly wages in the USSR, rubles per month, and 2024 euros equivalent, would be in the 1950s around 600 to 700 rubles, which would be 700 to 900 euros per month. In the 1960s, it would be 90 to 120 rubles, around 800 to 1000 euros per month. And this is because in 1961 the Soviet government redenominated the ruble to the 10.1 ratio, which meant that 10 old rubles would be 1 new ruble. That's why it was much higher when it in later phases would have been 60 for 70, instead of 600 to 700 in earlier phases. In the 1970s, the average income would be 120 to 160 rubles, or around 1000 to 1300 euros per month. And in the 1980s, it had grown again at 160 to 200 rubles, or 1300 to 1600 euros per month. Now that we know the average wages, what would be the prices of the cheapest cars during these time periods, also converted to euros in 2025? And basically in the 1950s, the Moskvich 401, which had a base price tag of 9,000 rubles, would cost 270,000 euros in today's money. Basically meaning that cars were extremely expensive, mostly for government officials and elite workers. In the 1960s, however, this was already much better, as the ZAZ 965, also the Zaporozhets, I hope I pronounced it correctly, had a price tag of 1800 rubles, around 20% the price. However, this was still the cheapest car and was priced 57,500 euros. And it was basically the USSR's first attempt of an affordable people's car. The 1970s already was a bit cheaper as well, with the ZAZ 966 or ZAZ 968, which had a base price tag of around 3,000 rubles at 42,800 euros. And the car production expanded, but basically in this time period the waiting lists were very long, often taking years to purchase a vehicle. And in the 1980s, yet again, the ZAZ was the cheapest, the ZAZ 968M, which had a base price tag of 5,000 rubles, which is equivalent to 29,800 euros in today's money. And as the prices rose, real wages also increased slightly, although a car still cost multiple years worth of salary. And now, how many months of average salary were needed to buy the cheapest car? In the 1950s, it would take 15 years for the average income to be able to purchase a car at 270,000 euros. In the 1960s, this had already decreased to 1.5 years, with around 57,500 euros. And in the 1970s, it was basically somewhat the same, between 1.5 and 2 years, which was equivalent to 42,800 euros. And in the 1980s, it actually had grown to 2 up to 3 years, which is equivalent to around 29,800 euros today. So a quick summary, in the 1950s cars were ultra luxury items costing up to 15 years of salary. And in the 1960s to 70s cars became somewhat more affordable, requiring 1.5 to 2 years of wages. And in the 1980s the cheapest cars still required 2 to 3 years of wages, showing inflation and economic struggles the Soviet Union was in. Cars that simply were available to the public were extremely expensive, had long waiting lists, and had many other factors that made it hard for people to buy them. Even second-hand, they weren't cheap, as often they would simply be even more expensive to buy, sometimes costing even more than 2 times as much second-hand than the car would cost new price. Besides these cars whatsoever, also luxury cars were around in the Soviet Union, only available for the elite. While the Soviet Union started production of cars very early, the start of production luxury cars actually started much later, in 1936. It all started with the 1936 up to 1939 ZIS 101, and the ZIS 101, produced by the Soviet Union from 1936, was one of the first luxury cars designed by the Soviet automotive manufacturer ZIS, Zavod imeni Stalina, later known as ZIL. It was a full-size car built to provide a prestigious vehicle for government officials and the Soviet elite. The ZIS 101's design was heavily influenced by American cars of the era, particularly the Packard 120, which was reverse engineered to meet Soviet production needs. This large sedan was powered by a 5.5-liter inline-8 and could reach speeds up to 120 km an hour. It was equipped with luxury features like plush interiors, spacious seating, and advanced technology for its time, making it a symbol of the power and prestige of the Soviet government. The ZIS 101 was produced in several variations, including a limousine version for high-ranking officials. It was often used in official state functions and was one of the first attempts by the Soviet Union to build a car that could rival the opulence of Western luxury vehicles. Production of the ZIS 101 continued until the late 1930s, when it was replaced by the more defined ZIS 110 in 1941. Despite its short production run, the ZIS 101 set the foundation for future ZIS or later ZIL luxury vehicles that continued to serve Soviet leaders well into the Cold War era. Specifications of the vehicle were as following. It had a 5.76-liter inline-8 producing 110 horsepower, giving the car a top speed of around 115 km an hour. It had a full length of 5 meters and 75 centimeters, and fuel consumption-wise, although wasn't that necessary, it had a fuel consumption quite terrible at 25.5 liters per 100 kilograms, mostly because of the big engine and the heavy weight of 3,100 kilograms it had. It was produced around 8,235 times, and during this period, private car ownership wasn't a thing in the Soviet Union yet. However, the car had a price of 45,000 rubles, which would be around 380,000 euros in 2025. The same year, in 1939, it was actually succeeded by the ZIS 101A, and it was produced by the Soviet car maker ZIS again. It was an upgraded version of the original ZIS 101, which was introduced in 1936. The 101A, specifically designed as a sportier model, was produced from 1939 onward and was designed to provide a luxury driving experience with a streamlined, elegant body. It was one of the most prestigious vehicles of its time, often associated with the elite and high-ranking officials of the Soviet Union. In terms of design, the ZIS 101A featured a more refined sporty appearance compared to the standard ZIS 101, and it was equipped with a more powerful engine. The car was primarily a passenger sedan with the distinctive high-end features, a characteristic of ZIS models that were known for the luxury and advanced engineering for their time. It became a symbol of Soviet high society and was often used for official purposes. Like its predecessors, the ZIS 101A was heavily influenced by Western automotive designs of the 1930s, particularly those from luxury American car manufacturers, a reflection of technological and industrial collaboration between the Soviet Union and foreign countries in the pre-World War II period. This engine actually was quite the same, although it was actually sportier. It had the same 5.76-liter inline-8, although this time producing 116 horsepower, giving the car a higher top speed of 130 km an hour. It had the same length of 5 meters and 75 centimeters and had the same fuel consumption because of the actual weight being the same as well, 3100 kilograms and 25.5 liters per 100 kilometers. It was actually produced quite a lot, 4,216 units in just 2 years. And just like the ZIS 101, this car was available to the public, and the price tag actually was higher at 50,000 rubles this time, or 410 to 450,000 euros in 2025. It eventually took 5 years due to World War II to continue production of luxury cars by the Soviet Union, as in 1946 the next luxury car was made in the Soviet Union. The ZIS 110. This was a luxury Soviet vehicle produced between 1946 and 1958, initially designed to replace the pre-war ZIS 101. It was a flagship model for the Soviet government and leadership, including being used by Joseph Stalin himself. The car featured a body inspired by American design of the area, particularly the Packard, though it was uniquely Soviet in terms of engineering and production. The car was powered by a 6-liter inline-8, capable of producing 140 horsepower, and it could reach a top speed of around 135 km an hour, which was impressive for a car its time. The car was equipped with a 3-speed manual transmission and featured a hydraulic braking system, a notable innovation for Soviet vehicles of the period. In terms of design, the car had a robust and stylish exterior with a large imposing grille and elegant details like dual rear taillights and advanced headlights. The car was luxurious inside with high quality materials and features like a full leather interior, power steering and advanced instrument cluster for its time. Approximately 2,088 units of the ZIS 110 were produced, and it was used by high-ranking officials until its production ceased in 1958, when it was replaced by the ZIL 111. The car had a 6-liter inline-8 with 240 horsepower, and this gave the car a top speed of 135 km an hour. 0 to 100 time it was actually quite decent with 28 seconds, because of the very big length it had at 6 meters, and a weight of 2,550 kilograms. This gave the car a fuel consumption of 28 liters per 100 kilometers, and around 40 or 50 cabriolets called the ZIS 110 were built within the 2,089 units of production. Although yet again not being available to the public, this car was estimated to be more affordable with a price tag between 40 and 45,000 rubles, or 280 to 320,000 euros in 2025. Introduced while the ZIS still was in production, the ZIS 115 was introduced in 1948. And this was a heavily armored limousine designed for high-ranking Soviet officials, particularly Joseph Stalin. It evolved from earlier models like the ZIS 110, which was initially not accepted due to its excessive weight. To address this, the 115 featured a lighter body, shedding 400 kilograms from the previous model, and underwent significant improvements in both armor and performance. This model had 6 seats, a 4-door configuration with rear doors opening opposite the vehicle directions of travel for added safety, basically suicide doors. The car's armor included a capsule design similar to what was used in military aircraft, incorporating high-grade steel armor. It was equipped with windows made from a special armored glass that could withstand rifle bullets, and the car's engine was actually the same 140 horsepower 8-cylinder unit used in the ZIS 110, and it was built to endure even explosions, with the floor crafted from tank-grade steel. The 115 was designed for exclusive use by top Soviet leaders and was equipped with numerous luxurious features, including an advanced communication system, hydraulic window lifts, and a uniquely comfortable rear seat. Of this model, only a few units were produced, and after the service, these cars were typically returned to the factory for decommissioning and scrapping. The 6-liter V8 actually was more powerful this time instead of the 140 horsepower I said earlier, as it produced 162 horsepower, giving the car a top speed actually less high than the 110, with the top speed of 121 kilometers an hour. The 0 to 100 time also was very bad because of the very heavy weight of 4200 kilograms, and it actually took 45 seconds to reach 100 kilometers an hour. It still had the same length of 6 meters, and because of the high weight, it was actually very terrible on fuel, as it had an average of 45 liters per 100 kilometers. Of this model, around 32 units were produced. And this car had a huge price tag of 800,000 rubles, or 5.5 to 7.5 million euros in 2025. The last car that was luxurious and it was actually introduced in the 1940s was the ZIM 12 or GAZ 12. And it was a luxury car produced by the Soviet Union from 1949 to 1959. It was developed by the Gorky automobile plant to replace the earlier GAZ 11 and to compete with similar foreign vehicles, offering advanced features and luxury for its time. The car was intended for high-ranking Soviet officials, including government ministers and ambassadors, and it was actually somewhat a cheaper alternative for a luxury vehicle, as it was powered by a 3.5-liter inline-six engine, providing a smooth and powerful ride. Its design emphasized comfort and prestige with a spacious interior, high-quality materials, and features like electronic windows and a hydraulic system for various functions. The body was a large sedan with a refined and stately appearance, typical of the Soviet Union vehicles of the era. The vehicle's production spanned the late 1940s and 1950s, during which time several variants were produced, including special versions for different purposes, such as ambulances or modified models for official duties. Despite its luxury and advanced design, production was limited, and the model was eventually replaced by more modern vehicles in the 1960s. The 3.5-liter inline-six delivered 95 horsepower, giving the car a decent top speed of 126 km an hour. 0 to 100 time it wasn't that great, as it took 38.9 seconds, and the dimensions actually were very good, as it had a length of 5 meters and 53 centimeters. Fuel consumption wise, it was actually much better due to the smaller engine. It was actually a 3.5 instead of a 5.5, for example, and this gave the car an average fuel consumption of 19 liters per 100 kilometers. And it was also very much thanks to the lower weight of 1915 kilograms. It was actually the most successful and most produced luxury car so far, with 21,527 units made. The ZIM 12 was aimed at high-ranking officials who could not afford the more exclusive ZIS models. Its affordability and reliability made it a popular choice. It had a price tag of 40,000 rubles and was actually quite pricey still, but it was actually 290 to 320,000 euros in 2025, being much cheaper than some of the ZIS models. Thanks for watching this part of the video. In the next video, we will talk about other luxury Soviet cars that were produced in the Soviet Union after the 1940s, up to the end of the Soviet Union. To be able to upload more videos in the future, please consider becoming a member of my channel or sending a super thanks on this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Don't forget to check out this playlist with many interesting videos covering various parts of the automotive industry, and I will see you in the next video.